In today's video, we have lots to discuss, including a coaching change in Edmonton, plus we have the latest trade talk around teams like the Montreal Canadiens, the Vancouver Canucks, Philadelphia Flyers, Calgary Flames, and Boston Bruins, and some injury updates from around the NHL. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots to talk about here today. Before we get into the news, though, I just want to acknowledge the passing of a longtime NHL player, and that's former goaltender Roman Cechmanek, former Philadelphia Flyer, Los Angeles King, passed away at the young age of 52. We don't know the exact cause of death, so I don't really know what happened. Nothing's been released that I could see online, but he was a great story. He was a unique goaltender. Came up really late. I believe he was like 29 when he made his NHL debut. Certainly played well into his 30s and had great success. Obviously, largely with the Flyers. I think is probably where most people remember him playing and having that success. But certainly just unfortunate to hear that he's passed away at the young age of 52. So certainly want to acknowledge that and wish our best to his friends and family. As we mentioned earlier, there is a video on the channel in case you missed it. I'm sure that you've probably caught the news at some point today, though. The Edmonton Oilers made a significant change, and that was relieving head coach Jay Woodcroft and assistant coach Dave Manson of their duties today. We finally heard later in the day a press conference involving CEO Jeff Jackson and GM and President Ken Holland. They brought in new coach Chris Knobloch. Of course, Knobloch has, I think, about 20 years experience between assistant and head coach roles in various leagues. He's been a head coach in the OHL and the WHL, AHL, and he's been an assistant in the NHL. One thing I found interesting, of course, Knobloch, he's got a good resume and a good coach, regardless, but there is a connection to Connor McDavid. He was McDavid's junior coach with the Erie Otters. And I just found during the press conference, Ken Holland and Jeff Jackson, to me, just seemed to be saying different things. They didn't seem to be giving the same message. Like, they were asked by reporters if players were talked to, consulted, etc. before the change was made. It's not that unusual for a general manager or the leader of the hockey operations department to maybe talk to the team captain or the leadership group just to get a feel for what's going on in a room, what those guys are thinking, etc. They may not obviously, make the decision, based on player feedback, but it sometimes plays a role. It's not unusual at all. Ken Holland says that he had spoken to the leadership group and he didn't think that the team had tuned out Woodcroft or anything like that, but he couldn't wait another 10 games to find out that was going to happen. But he says he talked to a lot of the players recently, whereas when Jeff Jackson chimed in, he said that the players weren't really consulted, that they're only here to play hockey, and his experience, they don't really want to be involved in decisions like that. I just found it weird. So you're going to tell me, and I expect me to believe the fact that Connor McDavid doesn't have a major influence over this organization. You now have Jeff Jackson, the CEO, who was his agent. You brought in one of your main offseason acquisition was his junior teammate and buddy Connor Brown. And now you're bringing in a former coach that he dealt with in junior. Obviously, it's not unusual for a guy like McDavid and his stature and his importance to the organization to be consulted. I just don't know why they would have mixed messages like that. I don't know. I'm sure that he is talked to and consulted on a few things. It may not be the end-all, be-all, but I'm sure they very much value his opinion and want to do everything they can for him and Leon Draisaitl to remain Edmonton Oilers for their entire careers if they're able to do that. So just found that part of the press conference kind of weird. Obviously, Knobloch's going to bring in a little bit of a different defensive system. A lot of people think that McDavid will be able to get going offensively. I'm not entirely convinced that's the case. He's the best player in the world when he's active and healthy, but right now I don't think Connor McDavid is right in a sense that I think he's more hurt than letting on. I don't know if a coaching change is going to change that. Jay Woodcroft to me was a good coach, had a great winning percentage. I understand he had a difficult time making adjustments this year to get back on track, and that's certainly his responsibility. So I do kind of get it, but I thought they maybe owed him a trade. He's got a great winning percentage, like, what is it, 683 or something like that. He only really had one full season, a little bit of this one. When he came in the first time around, like, he came in later in the season, taking over for Dave Tippett. I don't know. I just feel like he's a scapegoat here. I think his roster construction is a bigger part of the issue. The decor is not very good. Goaltending hasn't been very good. And now suddenly this year they can't score. I just don't think that's all on Woodcroft. I thought they'd try to trade and shake things up first. But at the end of the day, they're kind of hitting the panic mode here. They don't want to waste the season, and I get that. I don't blame them. It's easier to change a coach than it is to change a bunch of players. I also get that. Prices are high to make trades. Word was a few days back that they were really close to pulling off a big trade involving a goaltender. We don't know the exact details, but speculation was it was both Montreal. Obviously, that never happened for whatever reason. It could still possibly happen. Hard to say. But just now that we've had a chance to hear from the others around the changes that we talked about earlier, I just found it kind of weird, a little bit surprising. Change was needed for sure. I just didn't know that this was the one that's coming. I think really the way the roster has been constructed by Ken Holland, I think is a bigger part of the problem. But that's my take. I'd love to know what your guys' thoughts are on Woodcroft and the Oilers situation. I think Woodcroft will get another NHL opportunity. He's fairly young. He had a great record. And I think he was kind of a scapegoat here. So let me know what you think down in the comments. We'll discuss that a little bit further on. Some other injuries and updates around the league when it comes to rosters and whatnot. San Jose Sharks captain Logan Couture. I don't know how long he's going to be out, but it sounds like it's going to be quite some time. Coming into the season, we were told week to week, and then he had a setback, and then we're told he's going to be out for a little while longer. Now he suffered another setback. Now they're saying he's out indefinitely, and they're not using the word week anymore. They're using the word months. So it's difficult to say. Greer said essentially, the GM Mike Greer said that every time he seems to be making progress, he has setbacks. And then that's obviously not good. So he's like, they ultimately have to let the injury heal, and they don't have a definitive timeline on how long that's going to take. So at this rate, is Logan Couture even going to play this year? I don't know that we can honestly say that he will. It's difficult to say. So we'll have to wait and see the situation, but it could be an extended period of time for sure. A couple of news and notes around the Avalanche, and also involves a player who is going to miss the entire season. That's goaltender Pavel Francouz. We know going into the season he was dealing with an injury. They didn't have a definitive timeline, but it sounded like it might be a longer-term thing, which explains, obviously, that they were in the market to maybe add some extra depth at the position to give Georgiev some help. And now they're saying that he's going to miss the entire campaign with a lower body injury. He's apparently going to be heading back to Europe to go home, be around his family more. He is also a pending unrestricted free agent. So is this going to be the end of his time with the Avalanche or in the NHL in general? It's hard to say. We'll have to see that a little bit further. And the Avalanche, in terms with the open roster spot, now with him being on LTIR all year, have signed Joel Kiviranta. Kiviranta went to camp with the Avalanche on a PTO, ended up taking a minor league deal, and now he gets signed to an NHL deal now that they have the option of doing so. A couple other news and notes too. Montreal has recalled defenseman Gustav Lindstrom and sent forward Yoel Armia back down to Laval. And of course the Ottawa Senators taking off for Sweden today have recalled defenseman Jacob Larsson and goaltender Matt Sogard, basically for extra depth where they're going to Sweden to play a couple of games. It never hurts to have a third netminder in case there's an injury, and an extra defenseman as well. And of course, Larson has a bit of NHL experience already, so it makes sense to have a guy like that with you. So obviously the Sens won't play again for, I think they have 6 days off before they play. I know Detroit was already, because they didn't play the day before, so they were already in Sweden. I believe they had their first practice today, and then the Leafs and Minnesota are heading over as well. So it'll be fun to see those games towards the end of this coming week. A few other news and notes around the NHL. Elliot Friedman talked about on the Saturday headline segment of Hockey Night in Canada that the Habs and goaltender Samuel Montembeault are working on a contract extension, and it sounds like they're making some progress. So obviously we know in the Habs goaltending situation, 3 goaltenders still on a roster, not ideal. Lots of talk around Jake Allen, which we'll obviously get into here in a minute as well. Caden Primo seems to be the guy who gets the least discussions, except whenever anybody brings up the waivers word. Habs are quite reluctant to put him on waivers because they feel like he'll get picked up and they'll lose him for nothing. So they don't want to do that. They're talking extension with Montembeault, and it sounds like they kind of want to keep him around to be the somewhat, I guess, I don't know if you want to call him the goalie of the future because he's not super young, but he's certainly not old either. But I think they're hoping he can be more the goalie of the present with, the still potential for Primo to take over down the road. So it sounds to me like a trade involving Jake Allen is more and more possible. If they sign Montembeault and they don't want to lose Primo, that kind of eliminates two out of the three. I mean, Jake's been really good for them. He's has a good stats this year, so maybe selling high is a possibility, trying to get a good return. We know the Oilers were in the market, and it's believed that he was the guy they were talking about. Montreal apparently has been zoned in on Oilers prospect Xavier Bergeau. Should a deal come together, that's likely who they're going to be requesting in a trade. I don't know if the Oilers want to do that or not now that they've made a coaching change, and they called up Pickard. Are they going to be making another move quickly? Or are they going to give this coaching change a little bit of time to see where things go? I don't know what kind of asking price Montreal is looking for. We know that they have interest in Bergeau. It doesn't mean that that's strictly the full details, 1 for 1 or anything like that. So at the end of the day, it's just looking more and more likely in Montreal, regardless of what Edmonton does, that a Jake Allen trade is kind of becoming more and more reality. But we'll have to wait and see. There's certainly a fair bit of interest. I said he's a veteran guy, but he does have some term on his contract, and he does have some trade protection. We don't know what his wishes are in that regard, what teams he would want to go to, which ones teams he would want to block. I know he's happy in Montreal as well, so I think he would probably prefer to stay, but at the end of the day, it's partially his choice, but partially not. So we'll see where Montreal ends up going in that regard, but obviously, the 300 goaltending tandem will eventually kind of come to an end here in the near future. There's also some rumblings regarding Montreal maybe being more warming up to trading Josh Anderson than before. Right? He's been mentioned in the rumor mill for like a year, but every time he came up, for the most part, Montreal denied really wanting to move him. There was one point where they were getting lots of offers with some pretty good returns and had even rejected trades. They viewed him as a good veteran to keep around with some of the younger players. At one point, he was playing more with Suzuki and Caulfield, but that's really a while back now. But he's really struggled this year. He hasn't really produced. I know fans have been a little bit frustrated with him not getting the power play time or the power play success when he was getting it. And I know Eric Engels of Sportsnet, who covers the Habs closely, had mentioned that he's still not entirely convinced that Montreal wants to move Anderson, but he says that if they were to, that he sees the Devils as being a good landing spot. Obviously, adding another winger with some muscle would be something that they would be interested in doing, according to what he's heard and seen. Does make some sense. Obviously, the former teammate Tyler Toffoli playing there with the Devils as well. But I think Josh Anderson at this point is going to be tough to trade with his contract, given how he's played as of late. We know that's going to be a difficult task for sure. But at the same time, I think it's just a scenario where the only reason his name is even out there is that Montreal, I think at this point, is listed a little bit more warming up to the idea of doing it should they get a return they're happy with. But at the same time, like I said, I'm not sure what the returns are going to be overly plentiful given how he's played. But we'll see if Eric Engels is onto something, if the Devils will eventually come around and strike a deal with Montreal. We do know that the Philadelphia Flyers are very much open to moving Morgan Frost. He's been a healthy scratch a lot this year, and there is some talk that there's gaining interest from the Vancouver Canucks. Now, we know the Canucks were interested in adding a defenseman. We know that the defense market has been a little bit tough for what they were looking for, which is why they haven't made a deal. For the most part, their decor has been a lot better than expected this year, so I don't think they're in any kind of a rush, really. I think they're just really looking to add some extra depth. They may still have their eye on Ethan Bear, too, who's recovering from injury. So I don't know that they're going to rush and make a D trade, but if the right deal was there, they'll do it. But I don't know that it's really as imminent as some made it sound. But they do want to add to their center depth is what the more bigger speculation is right now, and that Morgan Frost could be a prime target for them. We know they have interest in moving Connor Garland, possibly Anthony Beauvillier. I don't know if either of those guys would be, a player that the Flyers would be interested in getting back. But obviously we know that Morgan Frost with John Tortorella doesn't seem to fit and doesn't seem to be a part of their long-term plans. So clearly at this point, a trade is possible. And a team like Vancouver, up and coming, having a good season, wanting to add to their depth, makes a lot of sense. So we'll see what they end up doing. I don't know if the Flyers would have any interest in what they'd be offering, but we could see those two teams hook up if those talks continue. And of course, we got the big buzz from Nikita Zadorov on Saturday after his agent made it publicly known that Zadorov wants a trade and would like to get it done in Calgary as quickly as possible. A timely manner is the word that was used. But the Flames apparently have let Zadorov and his agent know that they'll certainly entertain his request and try to accommodate, but they're going to do it on their own timeline. And they're going to make sure they get the right deal that makes sense for their organization. So it's, as much as he might want to be traded quickly, doesn't mean it's going to come together that way. I did see an article today from Boston Hockey Now suggesting that maybe the Bruins should be in on this player as well. Previously mentioned on yesterday on the weekend here when it was first made public, the Maple Leafs, the Canucks, and the Devils were the main teams that were mentioned as teams that it was believed that he would accept a trade to. He is a pending UFA, so at the end of the day, it would just be a rental scenario and he can reevaluate in the offseason. Obviously, Zadorov to Boston would be a good pickup. Obviously, a right shot defenseman with a physical edge, big size. I think the Bruins would like him. I think he'd play to their style of game quite well. The Boston Hockey Now article suggests that maybe moving Matt Grzelcyk. They do have, enough players of that stature. Like Grzelcyk, obviously a little bit smaller, puck mover. Might be a fit in Calgary, especially if Noah Hanifin doesn't stick around. He might be able to grab a top four role and be a good skating, puck-moving defenseman for them. I don't know if the Flames would have interest in Grzelcyk as being part of the return. I think a lot of other teams would mostly be looking to move picks or maybe a prospect. But in this case, with the Bruins, if they were to pull off a trade, the Boston Hockey Now article suggests that it could be an actual roster player for roster player, and it might be a deal that makes sense for both sides. Obviously, Zadorov doesn't want to be in Calgary. Could be a good fit in Boston, and Grzelcyk, obviously, we know has been mentioned as a potential trade bait for some time with the Bruins as well. So I'll be curious to see where things go and how they make changes. The Bruins off to a hot start. If Zadorov's really interested in winning and wants to win a Stanley Cup, might not be a terrible spot for him to land. So let me know your thoughts on all today's news and rumors down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.